Sometimes we've done some jealous stuff that has ended up being disastrous, right? We've burned stuff, we've thrown stuff, we've wrecked stuff, we've harmed stuff. And envy has turned the other way on us, that it's caused us to do some things and try to be some things that we aren't, but we think we ought to be those things. In fact, they've been defined this way. Envy is we want what they have, right? So we see it and we think, if I just wear those shoes, everybody's gonna think I'm like them, right? Just buy that stuff, go those places. If I can be like them, then I'm gonna be like them, right? Because there's something that envies what they have, and we want it. And jealousy is the fear of losing something we have to them, right? We're jealous, we're gonna lose our man or our woman. We're gonna lose our job, our position, and we get jealous, and that does a lot of stuff inside of us. In fact, Brene Brown, this great researcher on how our brains works, writes something pretty interesting about this topic. She says, to compare is to be human. That there's something innate in you and in me that's just part of us to compare, right? We see somebody, maybe you ever pull up to a stoplight and you think, I'm gonna beat them off the line. Anybody else do that? Even though you're driving like this big SUV and you got all the kids in the back, you're like, if I can just get out a little ahead of them, I'll feel good, right? I beat them the first 10 feet at least, right? They caught up and kind of passed me pretty quick. But there's something that just kind of pops up, right? Maybe you maybe swim laps at the YMCA and there's this like 90-year-old lady next to you and you're starting at the same time and you're thinking, I can take her, right? There's just, and you ever been grocery shopping, right? And you got your cart and you see somebody else that's kind of making the beeline to the line you're trying to get into when you're trying to get through the aisles. There's just something within us to compare as human. We're neurobiologically wired to compare. She just says it's in us. That's not the problem, she would write. She says, where we have to stop is when we say to ourselves, okay, I'm comparing. How am I going to let this drive my behavior? To recognize that we're comparing and ask ourselves, what am I going to do about it? Am I going to let it sort of go off the rails? What am I going to choose to do with this? She's reminding us of this ability we all have when our emotions pop up, is to try to control them with our brains and kind of say, what am I going to do about this, as opposed to just responding to them. In fact, in this thing we call the Bible, this book that we turn to that informs our faith, there's a couple of sections in the Old Testament that are written by a guy named Solomon, who was purported to be at the time the wisest, not necessarily the smartest, but the wisest man who had ever lived. And in fact, he wrote a couple of parts of the Bible that show us his wisdom. One is called Proverbs, which are these observations on life he makes. Just general, he kind of sees stuff and he kind of says, this is how I see this working, right? And this is one of his Proverbs, one of his observations about life. He wrote, jealousy will rot your bones. And sometimes we've experienced it, right? About how it just gets in us and, we go into this jealous rage, we call it, right? It just kind of gets in us and eats away at us. For our problems, modern times, and this is 3,000 years ago, but modern times, we see their Instagram posts. For some reason, we follow them, right? Because it's like, we love what they have, right? And have you noticed their kids are always perfect in every picture, like it's staged? And you know why that is? Because they are staged. In fact, it's probably taken 50 takes. They probably had to take the little pieces of every 50 take and put it together, crop it, edit it later so that it actually looks like, oh man. And you look at them and you think, how do they keep their kids that way? I mean, look at those kids. They're all clean. Their shirts are straight. They're smiling at the right place. Their hair's all right. How do they do that? Or we see the pictures of places we've been and their pictures look nothing like the place we visit, right? They've gone to exact same places and we're like, whoa, how did I miss that? I mean, theirs are gorgeous, right? It looks like such an inviting place to go on vacation. And we felt like, no, wasn't that great? And the crazy thing is we think it's about looking like something instead of being something. If I can just look like that, if I just can have those experiences, then I'll have that kind of life that is put out there in front of me. And it's crazy because actually people are making lives out of this, right? Are living, these are their jobs. Their jobs is to be influencers. Some of you in this space, your kids, they want to be influencers. Maybe you yourself want to be an influencer, right? And the reality is what they're trying to influence is us to envy them. So they can sell some stuff because then they get the money and they're happy, right? They can say, look at me and you can envy me and give me some money and just make me happy. And I'm not knocking, that's just kind of the time in which we live, that people will follow you and watch you and buy the stuff you tell them to buy because you're influencing them. But I think I can speak for all of us that we have all wasted big chunks of our life chasing something we didn't want to chase, but felt like we had to chase. Some of this is why we ended up in the careers we ended up with, right? Or went to the schools, particular schools, universities, colleges that we went to. Not because we really wanted to, but because it kind of felt like we had to. In fact, last week we looked at a few statements by a guy named James, who was one of Jesus' brothers who became a follower of Jesus, which, like I told you last week, is kind of a crazy story. But we're not going to get deep into that. But it's like, how could somebody convince you that your brother or sister was the savior of the world? I have a quick 2-letter answer for that for me. It's no. It's like, but James gets there, right? And he becomes one of the big important leaders in the church in Jerusalem. And he wrote this general letter out. And we're actually going to go back and look at a couple of pieces again from it, because he talks specifically about this whole idea of envy and jealousy and what it does in us and to us. In fact, in James chapter 3, he writes this: where jealousy, where envy, and selfishness, selfish ambition are, where jealousy and selfish ambition are, there will be confusion, chaos, and every kind of evil thing, every kind of evil practice. Now, you may be thinking, whoa, that sounds a little bit over the top, James. I mean, that's kind of going way up there. But you think about, the chaos and confusion that happens, not just in your life, but in your families, in your groups of friends, right? Isn't a lot of it based on envy and jealousy? They got a nicer this, or that's going on between those two, and it's kind of bleeding over to everybody else, and it's like, ugh. And James is reminding us of what his brother had spoken about years previously to him writing this. And it's simply this: that it's ugly in there, right? And the reality is what comes out isn't much prettier. I mean, think of what envy and jealousy has done to your life, how it's impacted it, right? Because the reality is there's some snarky, sarcastic, petty, passive-aggressive ick in all of us, right? It's almost like, we're back in middle school or high school. It just kind of oozes out, right? It's like we make the little snide comment, or snarky, and petty, and it's just like, we pick apart. In the process of picking apart, we tear down kind of our sense of the value of other people. Just a few sentences later, James would go on and say, do you know where your fights, your conflicts, your wars and arguments, disputes and battles come? Do you know where all the tension you have comes from? He says, listen, they come from the selfish desires, the cravings that war within you. They come from inside here again, right? It's not just, we always think it's them. We're having the problem because of them. And James is like, no, it's us. Yes. Listen, he says, you want things, you desire things, but you cannot have them. Oh man, if I could just have that, right? Life would be sweet. If I could just go there, life would be perfect. But we don't get them. And so he says, because we can't have them, you're ready to kill, you're ready to murder, and you are jealous, you're envious of other people. We've all heard it, maybe heard it, we've seen it maybe. When somebody's so jealous, it comes in jealous rage, right? And how they lash out and how it just kind of consumes them. And they become all focused on, doing something to the other person that's taking something from them. He says, all this goes on, but you know what? You still can't get what you want. Which, let's be honest, frustrates us even more, right? Because we think if we can just do this, it'll get us back to where we want, and it never seems to get us back to where we want. So he says, here's what ends up happening to you. So you argue and you fight, you wage a war, and you just continue this whole battle going on. The snarky comments on social media, right? That's a beautiful dress if somebody else is wearing it, right? So that's what James said. Let's go back to Solomon for a moment. Again, this guy who was reported to be a wise person. Again, not necessarily the smartest person, but the wisest person. Because we all recognize that there is a huge difference between smart and wise, right? Because I've known some incredibly smart people in my life, and they were not always the wisest people. But this is about wisdom. This is about the way we see life, how we can connect these. Wise people have this unique ability to connect life to so many different things and see the bigger picture and while not missing the small picture. And over in what's called Ecclesiastes, which is sort of Solomon's memoirs, right? Sort of a biographical sketch of life. It's basically his take of, he's tried everything, he's done everything because he was wise, he invested wise, he got position, he got power, he kind of had everything he wanted. In fact, sometimes he got more than he wanted because he had like a ton of wives and a ton of concubines, which is a whole other thing. Boys and girls, ask mom and daddy what a concubine is. They'll explain it to you later. New Hope, bringing families together again. But, he says, I had all the riches, I had all this, the stuff, the buildings, the houses, I had everything that I could want. And this is his summary of sort of the takeaway from all that. If you've ever read it, it can be a very depressing book because it's like, we're thinking if we could just have those kind of things that he had, how could life not be great? And his point is, it sort of ends up being a waste because it doesn't fulfill the deepest needs in anybody. Amen. He says, listen, I observed the reason people work hard and toil and try to exceed. This is how, again, he's wise, he's smart. He watches how people interact and how they work. And he says, listen, I've picked up something as people work so hard, right, and toil, and they're trying to succeed, right, trying to get ahead, trying to make it. And here's what his conclusion of, is what he observed. He says, they are jealous of each other. That's the driving force. According to him, this wise guy, that's what's the driving force in your life and my life. That we're jealous of each other, and literally of our neighbors, right? Some of us, it literally is our neighbors that we're jealous of. Because how can they afford that car, right? How can they afford the addition they put on, or the swimming pool they've added? How can they afford all that? Because I know what they do, right? How can they do that? There's something in us that drives us. And Solomon recognizes it as the envy, as the jealousy that lives in us. His point is basically, listen, we determine how successful we are by everyone else. And the problem when we let other people define what things are is that means they're in control. And then he comes back to a line that if you've ever read Ecclesiastes, is sort of his catchphrase. But as he says, here's what I've observed is I've looked at people, they work so hard, they're trying to succeed, and the reason they're doing it is because they're jealous, they're envious of each other. That's what drives us. So I'm envious of you, you're envious of me, and we push each other to try to keep beating each other. And he says, this too is useless. It's like, and here's this classic phrase, chasing the wind. This great word picture, right? Because I want you to think for a second, what does that mean, chasing the wind? It's exactly what you think it means, right? It's like, it's exhausting, right? Because how can you catch wind? And the answer is, you can't, right? It's pointless because, again, you can't get there, right? It's hopeless. It never ends. And he says, this is the problem. It's like chasing the wind. You can't ever get a hold of it. You can't ever sit down and stop because you finally got there, because you can never get there. To put it in a little bit different phrase, there is always an His is newer, right? Hers is nicer. Their house is bigger. That's right. Their kids are, much as we hate to say it, their kids really are better, right? They just seem to be much better. Right? And it kind of, right? But there's always this There's always, the faster, the stronger, the prettier, the more educated the more connected the luckier, the happier. There's always an right? And we forget those are out there and we kind of go, oh, I want to be an But someone always has a bigger, better than you and I have. And the reality is the sets us up to never be content. To never be happy. Especially if Solomon's observation is accurate, right? That the reason we push ourselves so hard, we toil, is to try to, because of our jealousy of each other, trying to beat each other. So how can we ever be happy? Because every time I slow down to stop, you always seem to get ahead. And so I have to keep going. The sets us up to never be relaxed. It sets us up to never be at peace. And when we're not at peace, we can't enjoy our accomplishments. Which is sad because some of you have been very successful. Some of you have accomplished important things. Some of us have accomplished things that are important, maybe not to other people, but to us and our capabilities and where we started at and now where we're at are huge accomplishments, right? But we can't sort of enjoy that because, that's right. To put it like Solomon said, it's literally like chasing the wind. But Solomon didn't end there. It's just this observation of, the thing that drives us is our jealousy, our envy of each other. He went on to say, listen, some say it's foolish to fold your hands and do nothing because you're going to starve to death, right? So he says, some people say, well, you can't go the other way. You can't just sit back and do nothing because if you don't got any money, you're going to starve to death, right? But Solomon says, here's struggling for more, which we understand, right? It's like there's always this more and better, more and better. And we live in a culture that recognizes that. We pay people to influence us. Simply by watching them, we monetize. Our watching monetizes their life. And companies know this. Some of you have gone and stood in lines when the next iPhone comes out because you got to be the first. Why do you have to be the first? I don't know. You have to answer that for yourself, right? But we gotta get the newest and latest because it's an error. Someone says, listen, it isn't, I'm not talking about, folding your hands and not doing anything, but I am talking about learning this idea of being content, even if it doesn't seem like it's much. Better than struggling for more because, oh, by the way, that is like chasing the wind. This never-ending cycle that you can never get to. And here's the question we ought to ask ourselves. Should we keep doing something that makes us feel less about our life? Is that a good idea? Again, he writes, again, I saw something here on earth, under the sun, another phrase that if you read Ecclesiastes, under the sun keeps coming up. He's basically what I noticed here on earth, right? Here's another thing I saw that earth was useless. I saw a man who had no family, no son or brother. What this meant in his context was he had nobody to inherit his stuff because ladies, back in his day, 3,000 years ago, you couldn't inherit anything. So you had to have a son or a brother, some male to pass along to. Here's a guy who's working, right? And he has no family, no son or brother. There was no end to all of his hard work, all of his toil, but he was never satisfied with what he had. Now, this is 3,000 years ago. Life has not changed dramatically in 3,000 years, has it? Which reminds us that life has probably never changed too much for humans. There's sort of this thing in us, right, that push and try to get ahead. There's no end to his hard work. Some of us understand how it feels like, right? It just seems like this never-ending cycle. But Solomon's point isn't just a never-ending cycle. It's a never-ending cycle because we are never satisfied with what we have. So if we're never satisfied, we have to keep getting more, which means we have to keep working, which means it just keeps going and going and going. In fact, Solomon says, listen, this guy, he never asked himself these questions. For whom am I working so hard? For whom am I toiling? For what's behind this? Why don't I let myself enjoy life? He never asked himself those questions. Those very deep, penetrating questions, right? Why am I working so hard? And why can't I let myself enjoy some life while I have life?
Yes.
Sometimes we never have enough is because we never let ourselves have enough. And this is his conclusion. This also is very sad. And oh, by the way, it's useless. So I thought it'd be helpful today to do a little self-exam today. So let me ask you just some questions. You have to answer this out loud. I want you just to think about these. Who are we doing this for, right? If we were to sit down and have a talk, sitting over some, lunch or coffee or just kind of hanging out, and it's like, and I was asking you about, the thing that drives you, right? And the push, if you're kind of in that category of kind of pushing for more, who are you doing this for, right? Because after I asked that question, I would want to follow it up with a second question that's almost identical, and that would be this. who are we really doing this for? Because what if the expectations we're trying to live up to are self-chosen? Even though we may think, no, Mike, it's kind of put on me from other people. Other people have expectations of me. I have responsibilities. I have all these pieces. And it's like, yeah, but, right? Because I think for some of us, if I was asked, why are you working so hard? Why are you spending so much time doing all that stuff? We would answer this. Which we kind of go, oh, that's good. Good person, right? You're doing this for your family. But we would need to follow that up with another question. If you said, for my family, it would be this. Because the reality is some of us have this thing called a cocktail of confusion going on in our life, where we're winning at work and we're losing at home. And I go to work and I'm successful and everybody's like really appreciative and I'm like, man, winner, and everybody's like, woo, when you walk in the room. And when I get home, nobody goes, woo, when I walk in the room. It's just like, daddy, mommy, whatever they, help him. It's like, no. I can't seem to get it right at home, but I can get it right out there. And there's something in us that likes to get it right and to feel valued and respected. Because I don't imagine if we said, I'm doing this for my family, that every morning when you get up to go out to work, I don't think your family's standing at the door, cheering you on, saying, go get them today, go get it, go do this for us, go to work and do all this for us, and so you can come home and tell us all the great stories. We just can't wait. Most of us don't have that kind of home life. And if that's true, what if we're actually alienating the people we say we're doing this for? I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just trying to probe a little bit because I think it's important for us to think sometimes instead of just live. Now, if we were to ask, why are we doing this? Ask those questions that Solomon said this guy who was working so hard, who wasn't going to leave the stuff to anybody he cared about because he didn't have anybody he cared about left. That was a male. We might say, the reason we're doing this is to get ahead. All right? Because some of us need to get ahead. Some of us have gotten way behind. It's like, I'm just trying to get ahead, get my head above water so I can take a little breath before I keep paddling, right? And for some of us, that's actually a pretty good goal. But we would need to ask another question, because it's always helpful to ask probing questions. If we were to say to get ahead, here's the question we ought to ask. Because some of us, it's a who we're trying to get. Some of us, it's a what, right? I mean, it really is, why are we doing this? Is it to prove something to someone that may not know, care, or be satisfied? Because how it got in here and how it pops up at times, there's a story to that. The truth of the matter is, for some of us have been after our mom or dad's approval our whole life. And the sad reality is, and we still haven't gotten it. In fact, one of the sad stories I hear occasionally, but it's actually turns good. And actually, there's two events that I think about that have actually been related to our Easter program. This program we do about telling the life story of Jesus, and we have people that do different parts. I've had two occasions now from men that I'm going to guess are probably in their, 40s, maybe even 50. I had one at a previous place I was at where we did the same Easter program. And we had the guy who played our devil that year wasn't able to be it, had to go find somebody, talk to some people in the local theater, found a guy, came over, he was great. And so he had done Friday night, Saturday night, and on Sunday night, as we were doing our final program, I was walking by where he was getting ready, and I noticed he was crying, and I'm like, I forget what his name is, I'll call him Kevin. I was like, hey, Kevin, you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm actually really good. And I'm like, you don't really look good. And he's like, actually I am. He said, my dad came last night. And I said, yeah, I met him. And he said, yeah. He said, he watched my performance and he said, wow, that was really good. Son, I'm so proud of you. And he said, Mike, that's the first time my father has ever said he's proud of me. And again, Kevin was like mid to late 40s. We had somebody this year whose mom came. And a real similar story, right? Saw the play, thought it was great, and wonderful, and was like, man, I'm so proud of you for being part of this, right? And it's like, again, first time my mom's ever told me that. Which I'm thankful that we were the catalyst behind them getting that point, but I'm thinking also, how sad to have to wait 5 decades to hear what we wish we could have gotten a whole lot earlier. Because when we get stuck in that cycle of trying to please somebody who seems unpleasable or we can't get there, it seems like what Solomon described as chasing the wind, right? So I'm going to add a little bonus footage today. So Matt, I want to talk to you. If you're a mom or a dad, I want to talk specifically to you right now, right? We just had Mother's Day a couple weeks ago. We're going to have Father's Day in a couple of weeks. This year, I want to encourage you to give a gift to your kids. And I'm serious about this. Here's what I want you. I want you to call them. I want you to call them if they're not locally or to oops. I want you to call them, before the day ends, or to sit down with them before the day ends. I want you to look them in their eyes, and I want you to tell them that you love them. Even if you're struggling right now with them, tell them that you love them, right? Tell them that you're proud of them. Because you may be thinking, well, I'd be prouder if they did this or that, right? I'll be prouder when they finish this. I'll be prouder when they finally do something for me to be proud of. And I'm going to tell you, what you're doing to your child's heart is not worth your pride. I'm serious about this. You need to call them up just out of the blue. If you have never said this to your child and they're like in their 30s or 40s or 50s or wherever they might be, right? And you say these words, they may be like, is that really you, Mom? But here's what will happen. It literally will change their life. Because it's something they've been wanting to hear from your lips their whole life. And the reality is, it might even change yours as well. All right, that's the bonus footage. We'll take that out. We'll figure it out later. But let's get back to what Solomon said. The first part where I talked to you about, jealousy will rot your bones. There actually wasn't the whole observation he made. He actually made a little bit broader observation. Here's what he wrote. He said, peace of mind means a healthy body. Peace of mind provides for us to have a healthy body. It does something internally. Solomon, again, a very wise guy. He recognized that this is more than just feelings. This is about actually inside of us what it does to us. This idea of peace of mind, what it can do to our bodies, what it provides. And it provides a healthy body. But jealousy will rot your bones. And it's this reminder that we'll never be who we were designed to be, as long as we're always looking over our shoulder. Jordan Peterson, in his book, 12 Rules of Life, one of his points was simply this: compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who somebody else is today. And his point, if you read his book, it is simply about trying to be the best version of yourself. Is kind of a hot, phrase out there, or been out there for a while. But it really is about quit comparing ourselves to others. Just compare yourself to yourself. Are you getting better, or are you getting worse? Are you staying the same? Compare yourself where you were yesterday as opposed to where somebody else is today, because they started maybe in a whole different place. Maybe they've had more opportunity. Maybe they had less opportunities. It's bad to compare yourself to somebody who is not yourself. Because the reality is, when we let our emotions lead, we end up in places we didn't intend and don't really like. And some of us have gotten there, right? Our jealousy has driven people away. Our envy has lost us friends. Maybe has lost us connections with our family. Maybe lost us some jobs. So what if we said enough with not being enough? What if we actually said that to ourselves? Well, stop it. Knock it off, Mike. Enough with not being enough. Be enough, Mike. Not to be being enough for somebody else. Because what if we chose contentment? What if we made a logical, rational decision to say, I'm going to learn to be content with what I have? What if we kind of just said, hey, I'm going to stop the the scrolling and the browsing and the looking, because that just kind of feeds this whole discontent, right? Feeds my envy, feeds my jealousy, and that doesn't end up ever in a good spot, right? What if I kind of said, I'm going to put a pause on this. I'm just going to try. What if I just tried for a week? Some of us are like, okay. Some of us are like, no, that's not going to work, Mike. Well, maybe start with a day and get it to a couple, but try a period. Try a period where you intentionally say, I'm going to stop and be content. I'm not going to keep looking. I'm not going to keep dreaming about what could be. I'm just going to focus on what is and enjoying what is. There's a great quote I read from a guy named Mark Manson. He's a podcaster. He's an author. I love a lot of the stuff he writes. This was so gripping to me because it makes us stop and think about both the choices we're making in life, and again, our emotions that are part of our life, and sort of the, our desire that things are great and good in our lives. Here's what he wrote. He said, you don't build psychological resilience by feeling good all the time. Wait for it. You build psychological resilience by getting better at feeling bad. Something we're thinking about, right? So let me close you with this thought. Is what's driving us what we want driving us? And if the answer is no, then maybe we need to take a little more control of things. Something to think about today.